After 27 days of laying out evidence and hearing witness testimony, closing arguments started today in the double murder trial of Alex Murdaugh.
It has been a very busy day today for the jurors. Earlier today, before court was even in session, the jury took a trip to the Moselle estate, and that is what you are seeing, a video from the jury's visit. They were able to see where Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were killed. The property has been vacant for 20 months now. There's the dog kennels we heard so much about. There is the feed room, that door. You will recognize that white door from all of the testimony. That is where prosecutors and experts say Paul was shot and killed. The first shot being inside the feed room, him and then walking 2 steps towards the outside and falling down. Maggie's body, of course, found just a few feet away.
Again, the prosecuting attorney here, Creighton Waters, wrapping up his closing arguments within the last 10 or 15 minutes. The defense will resume tomorrow morning at 9:30. So it's been quite a busy day out there.
Yeah, I don't think anybody expected the prosecutor to take the entire day for his closing arguments. We certainly, even though we've seen so much, expected it to be split. I expected them both to get their full closing arguments in, but we know Judge Clifton Newman likes to give this jury a rest, and he said at 5 o'clock, nope, the defense will not be starting today. We will send the jury home, let them rest, and bring them back in tomorrow morning.
And we do have team coverage tonight. We begin with our Darcy Strickland, who is down in Colleton County. She's outside the courthouse to tell us more about what is happening right now. Good evening, Darcy.
Good evening, JR and Andrea. At this point, it's nothing but media. You've got folks who are leaving the courtroom. Creighton Waters, the prosecutor, spent the entire day, his goal to poke holes in Alex Murdaugh's alibi, to give the jury an opportunity to look back over all the evidence as the prosecution has presented it and then try to make a decision. That's today. But tomorrow we hear from the defense. It's been 6 weeks of opening statements, testimony, and now closing arguments beginning today. And what we heard from Judge Clifton Newman today after that field trip to Moselle is that deliberations could continue into this weekend. We're going to start our team coverage by bringing in News 19's Sam Perez with more on what we saw today. Sam.
Yes, so prosecuting attorney Creighton Waters started his closing statements today around 12:15, and then they did break for lunch, and he came back in the courtroom at about 2:20 p.m. and took through the rest of the day until about 4:45, delivering those closing statements. Now, there are 3 times that Waters has been pushing. He says the themes he's pushing is that Murdaugh had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to kill his wife Maggie and his son Paul on June 7th, 2021. When it comes to motive, Waters is saying Murdaugh was in debt, on the verge of having his financial records exposed, which would have revealed he had been stealing money from clients for nearly a decade. He also says he was feeling pressure from the looming death of his father, who was in poor health, and from Maggie and Paul, who had recently caught him abusing opioids. All of this, Waters says, was a storm about to rain down on the defendant.
The defendant was the one person who was living a lie. The defendant is the person on which a storm was to descend. That legacy that you heard. And the defendant is a person where his own storm would actually mean consequences for Maggie and Paul, and consequences for those who trusted him. And that person is the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh.
As for means, Waters pointed out the large number of guns the Murdaughs had on their hunting property called Moselle. When it comes to opportunity, Waters has explained to the jury that he was alone with them and used his knowledge as a prosecutor to craft an alibi that seemed convincing until investigators began looking deeper. Now, Waters just finished his closing statement a few minutes ago around 4:45, and it's expected that the defense will come back with their closing statements tomorrow morning.
All right, yeah, if you guys heard there, the part at the very end that Creighton Waters was talking about, really asking the jurors to use common sense. And he said, so you are expected to believe, if you don't believe that Alex Murdaugh did this, that a 5'2" vigilante knew that Maggie and Paul were going to be there at the Moselle property, knew that Maggie and Paul were going to be down at the kennels, knew that there would be family weapons there available to use for the murders, since we've heard in testimony that both were killed with family weapons, and then arrived between 8:49 and 9:02. Did you think that was also a very powerful way to wrap things up by Creighton Waters?
I believe so. I mean, he had a portion of his closing argument when he talked about what reasonable doubt looked like and used a demonstration of a picture and tore a picture. I can't even remember. What was it a picture of? It was a famous art piece. And then he tore a piece of it off and said, this is the corner. This is reasonable doubt, but you still, the Mona Lisa, you still know that this is the Mona Lisa. So he was really deliberate and intentional about explaining to the jury what reasonable doubt looks like. It's not that it could not have happened, it might not have happened, but you have to use your common sense and make a decision based on that. But again, what the defense is hoping is that they can present that reasonable doubt, and they only need one juror to have that question in their mind as to whether or not Alex Murdaugh is guilty.
Absolutely, and I think you talk about common sense, and that's something that Creighton Waters seemed to be talking about a lot today was, continuously during his closing statements, he would bring up a piece of evidence and then look at the jury and say, hey, now use your common sense. Does this make sense to you? And I think talking about it in that way was a strength for the prosecution to be able to talk to the jury like that.
That was definitely a strength for him. Of course, we're going to be here throughout the rest of the evening. We'll be back on air at 9 o'clock. JR, you've been doing a great job with those wrap-ups throughout the evening, and we'll have more on the Alex Murdaugh double murder trial. We're live now in Walterboro.
Thank you so much, ladies.